Security program on spreadsheets, new regulations piling up, and audit dread? It's time for Vanta. Vanta automates security and compliance, brings evidence into one place, and cuts audit prep by 82%. Less manual work, clearer visibility, faster deals, zero chaos. Call it compliance or call it compliance. Get it? Join the 15,000 companies using Vanta to prove trust. Go to vanta.com/calm.
You practice who you are becoming before you actually become that person. Most people think that identity works the other way around. Once I become successful, then I'll act confident. Once I become disciplined, then I'll show up consistently. Once I become a leader, then I'll speak like one. They don't wait to become, they practice becoming.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govindh Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govindh Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 346, and another in our Edge of the Napkin series. You know, sometimes the most powerful ideas are ones that feel strangely familiar the moment you hear them, almost as if some part of you has always known them, just waiting for the right moment for them to surface. And if you think about it in sports and music and leadership and in life, the people who perform at the highest levels rarely begin with performance. They begin with practice. They watch the film, they walk through the plays, they rehearse the movements slowly at first, and then they move through it with more speed, more pressure, and more complexity until eventually the practice becomes performance. And when you start to notice that, you might begin to wonder something interesting. What if becoming the person you're meant to be works the same way? What if the confident leader, the thoughtful partner, the focused creator, the compassionate human that you are becoming isn't something that suddenly appears one day, but something you practice? Practice in your thoughts, practice in your words, and practice in your actions. And maybe you've noticed that when you allow yourself to imagine a future self or a future version of who you are, and when you can see it, feel it, and hear it clearly enough, something inside you begins to shift. And perhaps you've also discovered that having the right people around you, people who can witness that version of you as it starts to emerge, it all makes the journey a little more real. So in this conversation, we're going to explore a simple but powerful idea that you can rehearse the future version of yourself before the world ever asks you to perform. We'll talk about what elite athletes understand about preparation and why your brain is far more programmable than most people realize, and how practicing in private with the people who hold space for you can help you become the person you're meant to be long before the moment arrives. Because sometimes the biggest breakthroughs don't happen in public. They happen quietly in small circles, in honest conversations, in moments where we allow ourselves to lean into the person we are becoming. So grab a pen and maybe even a napkin, and let's explore the idea that the future version of yourself may be a little closer than you think, and that every day gives you another chance to protect and practice becoming them. Let's dive in. There's an idea I want to play with today, and it might feel simple at first, but the more you sit with it, the more powerful it can become. And here's the idea. You practice who you are becoming before you actually become that person. Let's let that sink in for a minute. So most people think that identity works the other way around. They think, once I become successful, then I'll act confident. Once I become disciplined, then I'll show up consistently. Once I become a leader, then I'll speak like one, act like one. But if you study the way that great performers actually develop, you'll notice something really fascinating. They don't wait to become, they practice becoming. So let's think about elite athletes, and when we watch them perform on television, when we see them hit the winning shot, score the goal, or make that impossible play, we see the moment, but we don't see the thousands of rehearsals that came before that moment, before the game. There is practice. And before the practice, there's preparation. And the best athletes don't just show up and improvise. They start with something quieter. They watch the film. They study the playbook. They draw the play on a board. They imagine where each movement happens, where their feet will be, where their defender will come from, where the puck or ball will travel, and they begin by seeing it. Then they go on to the field or playing surface, and even then they don't start at full speed. They walk the play out slowly, step by step. They stand in position, they move deliberately, and they rehearse the movements again and again and again and again. Then they increase the pace, then they add the complexity, and then they add resistance. They add opponents, they simulate pressure, and eventually they arrive at the moment we call performance. But performance is just practice that became public over time. So what if life became the same way or worked the same way? And what if becoming the person you want to become is less about waiting for the right moment and more about rehearsing that person in advance? So let's think about it. If someone wants to become more confident, where do they practice being confident? Where do they practice confidence? If someone wants to become a better leader, where do they practice leadership? If they want to practice congruence, where do they practice congruence? If you want to practice calm, where do you practice calm? If you want to practice contribution, where can you practice contribution? Where do you practice these things? And here's the thing, most people don't do it, let alone even question where or if they can do these things. They wait. They wait until life puts them in a situation, and then they try to perform under pressure. But pressure is not the place where identity is created. Pressure is the place where identity is revealed. The truth is, you don't rise to the level of your aspirations, you fall to the level of your practice. And here's where things get interesting because your brain is totally programmable. Neuroscience tells us something really remarkable about this. Our brains are plastic. It changes based on what we repeatedly think, feel, and do. In other words, it's totally programmable. Every single repeated thought is a line of code. Every repeated emotion strengthens a neural pathway. Every repeated action becomes part of your identity, and that means something profound. You don't have to wait for life to shape you. You can shape yourself intentionally. You can rehearse the person you're becoming. You can install the operating system before the moment arrives. But here's the catch. Practice works best in a safe environment. Athletes practice in training facilities. Actors rehearse on stage before opening night. Pilots train in simulators. Musicians rehearse in studios. They practice in places where mistakes are allowed and even encouraged, where coaches and supporters can keep a watchful eye on posture, intent, and lean, where repetition is encouraged. So the question becomes, where do we practice being the person we are becoming? And I want to tell you about my sacred circle. For me, one of those places is a simple weekly call. Every week I join a group of men. We come together for conversation. But it's more than conversation. It's a practice field for identity, a place where we rehearse being the men we are becoming. Not the men we were yesterday, not the men defined by old patterns, but the men who are stepping into something bigger. And in that space, something extraordinary happens because we bring our best selves or our current selves to the circle, our leadership, our compassion, our strength, our focus, our presence, our ability to listen, our ability to support one another, our willingness to be honest, our willingness to be growing. Week after week, we sharpen and practice. And one of the first things we practice is something simple, being on time. Now, I know that might sound trivial, but think about what it represents. For me, when someone shows up on time, they're saying, this matters. I respect this space. I respect the people in the circle. I respect myself. And showing up on time is a small action, but it's rehearsal for something bigger. It's rehearsal for congruence, for commitment, for leadership. Because leaders don't just show up when it's convenient. They show up when they said they would. And another thing we practice is listening, real listening, which means also stopping talking on time. We wait, and it's not like we're waiting for our turn to speak, waiting to think about what we're going to say next, but actually hearing the other person, holding space and receiving their words, their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences. And this is way harder than it sounds because most of us are trained to respond quickly, to advise, to fix, to interrupt. But in this circle, we practice something different. We practice presence. And presence is one of the rarest leadership skills in the world. And at the end of each person's time, we do something unusual. We sit in silence just for a moment. No one rushes to fill the space. No one jumps in with commentary. We simply sit, allow the words to land, and the silence does something powerful. It gives the speaker a sense of completion, and it allows the group to absorb what was shared. And it reinforces a deeper truth that sometimes the most respectful response is stillness. And the most powerful thing about the circle is this: it allows us to practice the future versions of ourselves. Every week, each man steps into the space and brings the person he is becoming. Maybe he practices courage. Maybe he practices vulnerability. Maybe he practices clarity. Maybe he practices leadership. And maybe it's his turn to practice compassion or discipline. Whatever it is, he rehearses it there, not perfectly, but intentionally. And something absolutely fascinating happens because the more we practice something, the more natural it becomes, the more familiar it feels, and the more automatic it becomes in public. And eventually, the rehearsal becomes the identity. One of the ways this works is by borrowing the mindset of our future selves. Imagine the person you are becoming 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the wiser version of you, the calmer version of you, the stronger version, the more disciplined version. What does that person believe? How does that person speak? How does that person walk into a room? And how does that person respond to things that otherwise people would find stressful? How does that person treat others? Now, here's the key question. What if you practiced thinking like that person, that future version of yourself today? What if you rehearsed that mindset, posture, tone, decisions, not because you've fully become them yet, but because you're training your brain to move in that direction? And here's where my activation framework comes into place. 3 simple steps: focus, align, act. So let's start with focus. Focus is deciding what you want, not vaguely, not someday, but clearly, like absolutely clearly. What kind of leader, partner, father, friend, what kind of human being? And this requires healthy imagination where you create a 3D version of the future where you see it, hear it, feel it, step inside it, smell it, and even taste it. Your brain doesn't always distinguish the difference between imagination and reality. So when you imagine something clearly enough and often enough, you begin to build the neural architecture and code of that future identity. Then comes alignment. Alignment brings with it something radical self-love, because you cannot build a powerful future identity from self-rejection. You build it from acceptance. You look into your mirror every single day and say something that most people find almost impossible. I like myself. I love myself. I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of who I'm becoming, not because you're perfect, because you're committed, because you're growing, because you're moving forward. Alignment comes with honoring the present version of yourself. I like and love myself just the way I am. I believe in myself and what I'm doing and who I'm becoming. Alignment means honoring the present version of ourselves while building the future version. And then comes action. Act. And action takes many forms. Sometimes it means performing, but very often it means rehearsing. It means trying things, practicing conversations, testing ideas, sharing honestly with the people you trust, experimenting with new behaviors, and doing it in environments where growth is possible and held, where mistakes are allowed, where encouragement exists, and where people believe in the person you're becoming. And that's what my circle provides. It's a rehearsal space from my soul. And let me share with you a very short fable. There was once a young archer who dreamed of becoming the greatest marksman in the kingdom. He imagined himself standing in the great tournament arena with crowds cheering, arrows flying perfectly into the center of the target. And when he went to the training grounds, he struggled. His arrows missed, his hands shook, and his confidence wavered. And one day he visited an old master who lived at the edge of the forest, and he said, "Master, I want to become a great archer, but when I practice, I fail." And the master smiled. "Show me how you practice." And the young archer drew his bow. He aimed, he fired, and the arrow landed far from his target. And the master nodded. "You practice like someone who believes he is failing." And the young archer frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" The master handed him a cloak. "Put this on." The cloak was embroidered with symbols of championships. "Now, practice like the champion you will become." And the young archer laughed. "I'm not the champion." "Not yet," said the master, "but you can rehearse being one." So the young archer practiced again. And this time he stood a little differently. He breathed a little differently. He aimed with calm, and he started a little closer. He imagined the arrow already reaching the center, and something changed, not immediately, not perfectly, but gradually. Day after day, he practiced as the champion he was becoming and moved further and further from the target, aimed harder and harder, and one day the champion appeared. Identity follows practice, and that's the secret. You don't become confident and then act confident. You don't become congruent and then act congruent. You don't become calm and then act calm. You don't become a person of contribution and then start contributing. You practice all of those things until they become natural. You practice confidence until it becomes natural. You don't become disciplined and then act disciplined. You practice it until discipline becomes your baseline. You don't become a leader and then lead. You practice leadership until leadership becomes who you are. So here's the soft reboot. In a way, this process is like unplugging and plugging back in for the brain. You interrupt your old patterns. You install new ones. You update your identity, not overnight, but through repetition, through intentional practice, through environments that support growth. And that's what circles like ours provides for me. They are the training grounds for becoming. And there's another powerful element in the process: witnesses. When you practice becoming in front of others, something else changes because people begin to see you differently. They begin to reflect the future version of you back to you. They encourage it, they support it, and they hold you and treat you as accountable toward it. And that reflection strengthens the identity. And this is why community matters so much, because identity grows faster when it is seen. Eventually, the things that you practiced in private begin to appear more and more in public. The courage you rehearsed in conversation shows up in meetings. The calm you practiced in reflection appears in pressure. The congruence you practiced in moments in circle appear under stress. And the contribution you practiced and gave to the men and women in your circle and the people close to you show up in public. The compassion you practice with friends appears with strangers, and suddenly people say something interesting. They say you changed. But the truth is, you didn't suddenly change. You practiced your way there. So here's the invitation. Ask yourself a few questions. Who are you becoming? Where are you practicing that identity? And who are the people witnessing your growth? Because the right environment, the right practice, the right circle can accelerate transformations in ways that you might not imagine were even possible for you. And when you combine the practice with a simple framework, focus, align, act, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop waiting to become and start rehearsing your future into reality. And maybe that's the real secret. The life you want isn't waiting for you someday. It's waiting for you to practice it today. Make it a great day.